So first question of any good journalist is say and spell your name for us, please.
Mike Stagg, M-I-K-E-S-T-A-G-G.
Cool. And Mike, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Eunice, Louisiana, which is about 40 miles from here. That little finger of St. Landry Parish that sticks out on the western end. Eunice is at the tip of that. Eunice didn't want to be part of the new Evangeline Parish, so that's how we ended up at St. Landry, but I grew up there. And then has since then moved back once after I went to college. I was working offshore, bad mistake, going home. And then lived here, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Mobile, worked at newspapers, radio stations, stuff like that.
What was it like to grow up in Eunice?
Well, you know, in a way, it was sort of idyllic. You know, in those days there were three television networks. We got a bunch of newspapers at the house, daily papers. We get a paper from New Orleans, paper from Baton Rouge, the Bowen Enterprise. So we got, you know, weekly magazines like Newsweek or Time, something like that. And so it was. You didn't really feel like you were in the world, but the world was sort of out there. But on the other hand, you could see aspects of it, you know, showing up in Eunice. You know, civil rights movement was taking place. Civil rights movement was taking place in the '60s. The anti-war movement. Some of those things started, you know, showing up in Eunice, and you didn't really think about your town so much about what was good or bad about it. You just thought it was, and it felt so isolated that you didn't initially see all these connections with the outside world and your town. But gradually, the connection became more apparent, and then you had questions about how the town was operated and things like that, and that led to other questions and sometimes arguments and stuff. But the world creeped in, you know. But I think it was all part of just growing up and your consciousness changing, you know.
Yeah. How old were you when you started to make those connections, as you said?
Well, I think around. I know that I was always interested in politics. My dad was in politics a little bit. He was in the insurance business. So, I guess I remember the presidential election in 1960. I was 8 years old, President Kennedy, who ultimately ran. I was for Nixon at first, but then I realized Kennedy was a Catholic and I had to pay attention differently. The state elections after that, 63, I think it was a big election. My dad ran for police jury in St. Landry Parish, so I was plugged in from that point on, at least from the political side, you know.
And you kept on it this whole time.
Yeah. There's a great documentary, Eunice Boys Raised on Politics, and it's Curtis Joubert, a great uncle of mine, and a couple of other guys who basically they interviewed them while they were standing around cooking a big pot of gumbo. But great stories. But politics was like better than football in than high school football, college football in those days. You know, it wasn't a spectator sport. It was it was a participatory sport.
Would you say after you've had more experience in politics throughout your life, how would you say, or would you say that the political game in Eunice was different than or unique from the rest of the political world?
Well, what I recall from those days, there was a real passion about politics then. You know, people still say now in some of the rural parishes around here that politics is a blood sport, and they take their politics very seriously. You know, I think it's changed somewhat since then. Local politics has changed somewhat. I think people's belief in their ability to affect change is probably a little less than it used to be. And I think I think it's a false impression, but it's a belief, and I think that's where the work needs to be done now to convince people that they can make a difference in their town. I think we see a lot of that stuff around us now, that people are activated, they're motivated, and they're trying to make a difference in their town, in their state, and in the country.
Coming from that time and place where politics was a participatory sport, what advice could you give to the current generation and future generations to maybe get more participatory?
Well, I think the thing is to recognize that you own your community. You have a stake in it. The only way that you can basically exert your influence is by getting engaged in it. You know, part of what is amazing is that when people do get engaged, people who weren't involved in politics before, maybe get involved in a campaign, whether it's for a candidate or a cause, it changes their perspective on their community, because what you see, if you're not actively involved in either politics or government, everything's sort of distant, and it's sort of easy to demonize people and others. You don't know them personally. You know, it's oh, look, that's a crazy idea. But once you engage with people, then it becomes harder to demonize. You understand that you view them as people, not just these voices, and I think it really produces this sense that this is my community. I have a stake. I can make a difference. And so I think it's the most important thing is to get involved, and to get involved locally. You know, Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts back in the 80s, you know, he said all politics is local, and I think it's absolutely true. And the thing is that on a local level engagement, it's really hard to remain strangers. You're gonna meet people. They're going to be in your community. You're going to run across them in different settings, and so again, it just makes it much better. You know them. It takes off the rough edges in a way. They get to see you as a person. You get to see them as a person, and I think ultimately, you know, what we have to do is figure out how to get along, how to compromise, how to, you know, make sure that somebody's rights aren't trampled for something you want. And so that's a lot easier to do when you get to know people. And only the real place to do that is in your local community.
I think that's solid advice. Did you study politics in college?
Political science. I was a political science major. Initially, when I came out of high school, I went to Loyola in New Orleans. And my goal was to be a lawyer. And so 2 years in, my dad died, and I couldn't afford to go there anymore. I went to LSU in Baton Rouge for a semester, which I hated. LSU was about 3 times bigger than Eunice, and I had, you know, Loyola was a small college, about 3,200, 3,400 students there, and I was just disoriented at LSU. And the Watergate thing was happening. I saw this poster of all the people who had either been indicted or copped a plea to crimes in Watergate, and 51 of them were lawyers. 51 out of 51 on the poster. I mean, there might have been some others, but everybody who was engaged in illegal activity was a lawyer. So I said, well, maybe I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And All the President's Men came out, the book on Woodward and Bernstein and how they had followed this story. And I believe then that and still believe that if you get good information into the hands of people, they can make informed decisions. And so journalism looked like it had a certain appeal to me. Be able to accomplish some of the same things as an attorney can, in terms of, you know, in a different arena, not the court of law, but in a court of public opinion, and you do that by getting information in people's hands so they can act on it. So I studied political science. After I went to work offshore for a while and for Halliburton for a while, and I came to USL at the time. They didn't have journalism as a major. It was English with a journalism minor, which is pretty rough because, you know, I mean, English, I wasn't really into studying English, but I did get into the journalism program, and I got a job at the Daily World actually before I finished in Opelousas, and did that, worked for papers probably for 20 years on and off, different places, stringing or working directly. And so I enjoy the work. I enjoy being able to take sometimes complex issues and organize them in ways that people can understand them. And that's the basic work, so I like that.
Encouraging the discussion.
Yeah.
So you worked in newspapers primarily throughout your journalism career?
Yeah, I worked at newspapers here, Eunice, Opelousas. I did some stringing for The Advocate. I wrote for Gambit in New Orleans. I was editor of a paper in in St. Tammany Parish, the St. Tammany News Banner. I worked at a paper in Mobile, a new paper that had started off with some people I met over here. So yeah, primarily, I was news director at a radio station in Eunice, KJJB, that Tom Vanchet had started. And we had a lot of fun there. I was the news director. We actually had probably the first computerized election returns of a local media outlet. It was the '83 governor's race, and one of the co-owners of the station had a mini computer. I mean, literally, it was bigger than this table. I mean, it was, you know, a box about this big with a big round disc in it. And we took every precinct in Acadia, St. Landry, and Evangeline Parish, and we had to take a little bit of Allen because the Senate race we were covering was in Allen Parish. Got the ballot for each precinct, and then sent people to the courthouse, and they called us in with the numbers, and we had somebody in the back inputting the numbers, and so we were getting them in, you know, pretty much real time, not from the Associated Press, not from the Secretary of State, and but you know, so it looks so easy when it shows up on your screen, but you know, we knew from having put together all those precincts and ballots just how much grunt work was actually in it to get it to where it looks so easy.
That's really cool. Would you? What do you think of the current newspaper industry? They're going through a pretty tough transition right now. What do you think their future is, or?
Well, the need for good journalism is greater now than probably ever before, or at least as great as it ever was. And I think that it's a tumultuous transition that they're going through. It's all based on the collapse of a business model. You know, they were built on local monopolies, basically. You control, you know, you fight for dominance in a local market. But the internet broke all that down. The thing that really killed the newspaper business more than anything else was Craigslist, because you could list classifieds for free. So much of daily papers and weeklies used to be classifieds in the back end that people would pay for. So you could advertise for free on Craigslist, and boom, the next thing you know, their platform being pulled out from under them. But I think that you know, there's some successes we're seeing now. I mean, people, I think, have developed an appreciation for the importance of good journalism. You know, the Washington Post is making money since Jeff Bezos bought them. You know, the head of Amazon. What he did was he hired a bunch of coders to transform the operation of the paper and their online operations, and they're making money. The New York Times is doing well. I think the problem is that local papers, where local and state papers are the problem areas, because these national papers are going to cover the national stuff, but what we don't have going on right now is in-depth coverage of local government, state government. Things fall through the cracks. Things can, you know, the Washington Post motto is democracy dies in darkness. And in Louisiana and other states, when local coverage and coverage of what's happening in state government, where all that money goes, is not being done to the extent that it was, and I think we all suffer because of that. Things might get discovered later, but it's later, and so a lot of damage has been done in the meantime. So I think it's troubling, you know, but I think there's some positive things happening out there, and you know, I think there are some models that are working, and I think that, you know, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And I think that if you do value journalism, that, you know, get a subscription, pay to subscribe to some of these services. The rates are ridiculously low. You know, you can subscribe to the Washington Post for $99 a year. I mean, you know, New York Times is the same thing. So I mean, that's an incredible value. Again, but the problem is that local journalism hasn't found its footing, and so you have some really thin local coverage in papers. You know, Gannett has five dailies in Louisiana. Basically, you're getting news from all 5 markets in your daily paper, whether you live there or not. But what you're not getting is the depth of coverage in your local community that you used to be able to get.
How? Maybe you don't have an answer for this because maybe it's unanswered thus far. But how do you think we move the the local papers or the local news consumers into that model, or how do you think we get there? Because I think a lot of people agree that local journalism is suffering, but it's also some of the most important journalism, because like you said, all politics is local. So if you're
Yeah, well, I think part of it is defining your market. I was involved with, and I'm still involved with some conversations with people involved in the media business about, you know, your market. And they say, well, you know, we can't do this in Lafayette. So, well, maybe Lafayette's not your market. There is a market, but with digital, you don't have to be constrained by the geography. That's the big difference. So you might, maybe in the geographic Lafayette market, you can't find the sustainable base to keep your publication going. But if you cast your net wider, and what you're after is numbers of people who like what you're doing or curious about what you're doing or in your tribe, whatever it is, that you can find those numbers. But the market is bigger. It's not confined by the physical ability to deliver a paper, you know, to a rack or a newsstand or a door within a certain amount of time. So I think the future is digital. The print is just too expensive. And I think the other thing is that what digital really affords is the opportunity to do in-depth journalism that you just cannot pull off in print anymore because it's too expensive to do. You're not going to give, you know, a page and a half, say, on a daily paper. You can't give a page and a half in-depth, you know, investigative journalism in a paper that's got no advertising in it. You know, so I think it's digital. I think, you know, those models are working, and I think that advertisers are coming around too, recognizing that this is how you got to get out there and let your stuff be seen. You know, there was a great article in Talking Points memo the other day by Joshua Marshall, who's the founder and editor of that, and he was talking about Google and Facebook. They use a lot of Google in the infrastructure of their operation, email, stuff like that. And the point of his thing is that Google is so big that, you know, you can get whiplashed without them even paying attention to you. But Facebook is not doing any revenue sharing at all with publications. You know, you basically pay them to advertise. That's it. Google, you know, through their ad services and stuff, will, you know, they'll run ads through your publication. You'll get a cut of it. If you have enough traffic, it can be significant. But, you know, I think that one of the things that on the Washington Post that I've read about is that one of the things that they've done since Jeff Bezos bought them is they have sort of perfected an advertising platform that is not so much focused on numbers, but getting the right people to see the stuff that you want them to see from an advertising perspective. So I think, you know, it's a complex field that's in transition, and what the other side looks like is not completely clear yet, but more of it's becoming clear. And you know, I think, you know, while people want to trash the impact of social media and, you know, mobile devices on people's attention span, but, you know, you see those pictures from subways 50, 60 years ago, everybody with their paper up in front of them. You know, they were paying no more attention to the rest of the car than we are now when we're looking at our phone. But we can complain about the phone because we don't believe that people are looking at the good stuff like we are. You know?
Mike, all right, let me ask you a few questions about your involvement with AOC. So tell me how you first got involved with AOC.
Well, I've been a producer for a good while. I got into doing videos and on public policy stuff, and I liked the half-hour form that you could do, and basically an edited show, not a live show. You know, I didn't. So that's what I would do. I would do some videos, and Ed said, "Why don't you run them here?" I said, "Oh, okay." And so I did, and I got good response to them. And you know, so we work on the same platform basically, and so it was easy enough to do the transition to getting stuff from, you know, wherever else I was sending it into AOC, and so it just worked, and it was a great environment, comfortable, great equipment, And so it was always, you know, it was easy to do, easy to get involved in it. So I really liked it. And then, so video was the first stuff I did, actually, and I did some other people's shows, appeared on other people's shows, and never really had a show of my own. But then I was, for about 5 years, I did a radio show on KPEL. I was part of a radio show on KPEL, Winging It Wednesday, which is a segment they did every Wednesday morning. I did that for 5 years. It's a masochistic streak, I'm pretty sure. And but then convinced the station to give me my own show, because they had discussed it a couple of times. And so they did. So I started Where the Alligators Roam over there. And it was on for about 7 months, and they were having a tough time selling advertising for it. Surprise, surprise. It didn't quite match their marketing base. And so when that happened, I talked to Ed Bowie about bringing it over here. And I knew you had the radio station because Teresa Roloff and they were doing a show. So I said, okay, let me go talk with Ed. And so we said, sure. So the other interesting thing about KPEL, when I started doing the show, they were not interested in the podcast at all. Have no use for podcasts. They don't know how to handle them. And so when I came, had the idea to come in here and talk with Ed, and said, I'd like to be able to do my podcast. And yeah, and so I kept doing the podcast the same way. I hosted on my own site, but then y'all set up the AOC podcast network, and which was great because, you know, my initial idea when I started exploring this was, oh, well, I want to get listed in iTunes and the Android store. Well, I have, you know, server space, but I don't have a dedicated server, which you have to have in order to be able to be, you know, to qualify for syndication. So when y'all set up the podcast network and got all that taken care of, basically it became seamless. So it was like, oh, okay, man, best of both worlds. So I still host my podcast on my site, wherethealligatorsroam.us, and then y'all put it on Blueberry, and it ends up in the iTunes store and the Android store. So it's great. It's like national exposure in a way, you know? Oh my God.
What was your first impression of AOC?
Well, I think the first time y'all were still in the old building. Mm-hmm. I think when I first encountered, doing other people's shows, mm-hmm. It was in the other building. I was on Barbara Connor's show mm-hmm. a few times. I was on Portia's show a few times. There were some forums that were done, and so you know, I thought it was great that you get to have that kind of access, and I knew the numbers, how many households that AOC was getting into, and the feedback I would get when I'd be on somebody else's show, the number of people that would see it, you know, it's kind of impressive, you know, and so so when y'all moved into the Rosa Parks Transportation Center and got the facilities upgraded, it's like, whoa. You know, when I was doing, look, I'm very appreciative of people at Town Square Media for letting me do my show over there, but I did my show in a little spare studio they had on the side, and it was really rudimentary. Get here, you got a great podcast booth, you know, and plenty of microphones to go around, so, you know, it's really an upgrade for me, which was kind of shocking that I actually ended up with better facilities here than I had when I was working at Town Square, so.
Well, cool. And we're really glad that you came over here too.
Yeah.
What is, or what would be, if you're not already working on it, your dream project to work on or to produce?
Well, I have been working on a book on the oil and gas industry's influence in Louisiana for about 7 years. I have so much more data than I know what to do with, information I know what to do with, but there is a book. There might be more than one book now in it, but there is documentaries that would come out of this. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that while some people love books, that really the way to reach people is through over a screen, television, something, you know. And really people don't distinguish anymore what that screen is. It could be cable, could be, you know, over-the-air TV, could be YouTube. So telling this story is the thing that's kind of got me right now. That's what I'm working on. I just got a new batch of information that sort of ties part of it together in a way that I didn't understand before. And so that's what I'm after. I'm going to finish this book. I don't know if I can finish it by the end of the year, but it won't be long after, and then get that published, find a publisher. I might self-publish it, but then put together documentaries that can explain it, because it's a heck of a story.
That's awesome. That's exciting. All right. So, what are you reading right now?
Well, I just finished reading Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean, which is a book that came out this summer. It's on I guess the ideological roots of modern conservatism and their ideas about government. And so after I finished that book, when I bought her book, I bought this other book by her. It's on Behind the Mask of Chivalry, which is about the Ku Klux Klan in the United States in the 1920s, which was sort of their peak. And you know, one of the things that's happening in Lafayette right now, where there's a group of us trying to remove the Alfred Mouton statue from in front of the International Center. That statue was put up during that time, 1922. That was like the peak era. After, you know, after World War I, there was a resurgence in those. The statues had started going up earlier. World War I sort of put them off for a while, because people were dealing with, you know, more important issues. But it explains the context that statue went up. You know, Plessy v. Ferguson had said segregation was legal in the United States. People were out to prove that it absolutely was legal. They were disenfranchising blacks. They were, you know, erecting these monuments to white supremacy, and so. It's a timely book to be reading, and puts a lot of things in perspective.
Some heavy reading too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the thing is, I really hardly ever read novels. I don't read novels. To me, you can't beat you know, nonfiction. You know, everybody's trying to top it, but I think part of the problem is that a lot of times historians aren't good writers. You give a good writer some history and you get great works. Shelby Foote's Civil War trilogy, I think, is the best stuff ever written on the Civil War. He's a great writer. There are no footnotes. It's a trilogy, and it's probably 1,800 pages, maybe 1,500, between 1,500 and 1,800 pages. No footnotes. It's written like a novel, but it's great. He was in the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War. He appeared in that. Great writer, and I think some of the best history I've read is by people who are writers and not necessarily professional historians. David McCullough, Barbara Tuchman, people like that, who were writers and not professional historians, but they make great history books.
Well, I think that's some good suggestions for everybody, including myself. I'm gonna have to write those down before you go. Are you a music listener?
Oh yeah.
Who are some of your favorite artists, or who would be included in your all-time favorite playlist?
Well, you know, I'm a victim of my times. You know, I mean, 60s and 70s. You know, even my daughter says we had the best music, so I'm counting. I'm taking that as given now. You know, but you know, so Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen. I mean, all those people. The Beatles. You know, the Beatles really weren't around that long as a group, you know, really about 5 years in their high-profile stuff. But they made great music, and I just think that I like music that tries to motivate you, make you think, not just happy stuff. You know, there's plenty of good happy music around, but so yeah, I like music a lot. I like to go to concerts still. You know, so. Who were your childhood heroes? Well, President Kennedy was. You know, I was 11 when he was killed, and then of course, you know, the '60s. I mean, so 5 years later, Martin Luther King is assassinated, and Robert Kennedy's assassinated. You know, it was just. It seemed like, you know, it was. Here were sort of the best of what America produced in terms of leadership, moral leadership, political leadership, and they were being taken from us. I think anybody who, but you know, I think that while the great man or great woman theory is great, what actually drives history is people below them, the people behind them that enable the movements to occur, that are the movement, they embody the movements. And I think that those, so I think that there are so many heroes around that don't get the attention maybe that the great person gets, but if they are not engaged and involved in doing their part, that person doesn't, the great person doesn't get the notoriety, doesn't achieve the success that that is the basis of their stature, you know. So I think that, you know, that there are heroes are all around us. And I worked for 2 years with a friend of mine, Jack McGuire, who's another one of these writers who's not a professional historian. We worked on a book that he did on Earl Long's last campaign that University Press of Mississippi published last August, called Uncle Earl's Last Hurrah. Win the Race or Die Trying, Uncle Earl's Last Hurrah. And it's about his 1960 congressional race that he won, but then died within a week. But what I really liked about that book, there's so many people in there. They're not going to be mentioned in any other book. And there were people who were just working on his campaign, young people, older people working on his campaign, people he'd known a long time, people who just were drawn to them. But that's what campaigns are. That's what politics really are. It's not just a person who can write themselves a check for, you know, X million dollars and then go run their campaign. That's what really moves politics. It's what moves communities. It's what moves history. And so, identifying heroes, people who are driving change in the communities, I think is a great need and an opportunity. So that it's not just, you know, the same old people getting the same old awards for the, you know, they're coasting on their reputation, basically.
I think that's a great sentiment, and maybe a TV show we should talk about.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to ask a few silly questions if you don't mind. So, if you were a season, which one would you be and why?
Well, summer. Hot. The heat's on.
Nice. What are you most excited or passionate about? That's not a silly question, but.
Well, I just think shaping communities. I mean, I think that, you know, moving from potential to reality, getting as much of that potential as you can, whatever it is. I mean, I was involved with the fiber fight with on the side of LUS back in 2004 and 5 and 6, and then after that when it got caught in the courts for a while. But that was a thing where people made a difference in their community, and I think that that's proven to be a worthwhile investment for Lafayette. We've seen a lot of good things come of that, and I think that I like to. It's good for people to dream. It's good for people to have vision. And I think what's exciting about where we are right now in time is that the way technology has sort of flattened the world, you don't have to ask permission to find a way to contribute, to let your opinion be known, to put your idea out there. There's all kind of ways that the gatekeepers have been removed, that you can get your message out and, hey, throw it out there. Maybe people respond. If it's a good idea, people will. And so I think that's really exciting. But people have to understand that they have that opportunity and that power if they choose to use it.
Yeah. Okay, back to silly questions.
Oh, okay.
What's your superpower?
My superpower? I have a superpower? Well, I don't know. Superpower.
And you can pass on any of these.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I have a superpower. I think I can do. I think I have a pretty good eye for pattern recognition that can help. So you can't see around the corner, but you can kind of sense where it's going, where things are going. So that's I think what I can do best in a way. You know, I knew we were going to win the LUS Fiber fight, and I think we're going to win the Mouton statue fight as well, just because if you step back and kind of get out of the heat of the moment and look at the broader movement of things, the way the forces that are moving, not just locally, but you know, nationally and regionally, that if you can have a sense for those, then you can maybe see things before somebody else can, and that can be scary, but it can also be, you know, invigorating. So.
What is your spirit animal and why?
I'm a dragon. Chinese astrology says I'm a dragon, so hey. I can breathe fire every now and then. That's the rumor anyway. It's not a bad reputation to have. You don't always have to use it, you know.
I got actually, I had my I Ching read at some point, and they told me that I was a dragon, but I was misdiagnosed as a dragon. And I found out like a year later I was actually a rooster.
Oh man.
And so yeah, I've always wanted to do like a children's book or something. That's the rooster who thought he was a dragon.
All that time you got invested in the dragon.
I know, I really like bought into it for just a minute.
I did a double check on the dragon, so.
That's good. What achievement are you most proud of?
Well, being a parent, that to me was, you know, the best. I mean, raising our daughter and being part of her life, that's everything else pales by comparison.
That's good. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, there's an old saying, stand for something or fall for anything. That I stood for something. I didn't fall for the grift or the head fake, and that those things that I stood for mattered and made a difference, not only to me but to others.
All right, I think this is the last question. You can pass on this one too. Sometimes it's tough. Can you describe yourself in 3 words?
Intelligent, empathetic, and stubborn.
I think that's pretty solid.
Hey, well.
Mike, thanks so much for your time and coming down.
All right, thanks, man.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.